I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who made this sermon and this service possible. Today's sermon will be split into two parts, punctuated by a hymn. Growing up Unitarian Universalist is a very unique experience. Other kids who had a religious community knew what they believed in and what texts they got it from, while all I could cite was the 7 principles, one of which literally encourages a free and responsible search for truth. Once, in kindergarten, I had a very memorable conversation with a fellow 5-year-old who insisted that you can't go to church if you don't believe in God. I was confused. Did he mean his church just told him what to believe? As inconvenient as our unique religious culture was to me as a kindergartner, as I've grown up, I've come to appreciate how the UU Church encourages self-determination, unlike so many other religions. And now I think I'm old enough and have done enough school research projects that I'm finally prepared to take on the great UU research project of religious exploration. I don't expect to discover that I was all wrong about religion, or that I secretly believe or actually believe in a higher power, but religion is more than just that. It's an entire worldview. What religion someone belongs to, or what their spiritual beliefs are, if any, determines or impacts everything they do, think, and feel. This includes the way that they share their ideas with those in the future. In grade school, I was told about the power of language so constantly it got annoying. My teacher's goals were great, and so was their message. Speak out against injustice, say what you believe, and tell the world your life story. But for me, who had just recently overcome some difficulties learning how to read, the most powerful form of language wasn't spoken, but written. The authors of the kids' fantasy and adventure novels that I loved had created a world in their minds, and through simple ink on a page, had placed that world into my own. How fantastic. I was getting the American Midwestern grade school version of the story, of course. A child at my age being raised in the Old Norse religion, for instance, would have had a very different idea of the powers written language held. Maybe they had seen a rune poem before, a text that recorded symbolic meanings corresponding to each phonetic rune. Even if they didn't understand these double meanings, they likely would have believed in divination through the practice of bone casting. The idea that one can tell the future simply by writing runes on pieces of animal bone, asking a question and drawing one of these bones at random. The meaning of this rune, as detailed in the rune poems, was the answer to this question. But most famously, there were the rune stones. Although many rune stones were simple boundary markings or commemorative monuments to great achievements, others detailed the myths and legends believed by those inscribing them, stories closely linked to their pagan beliefs. Why would someone bother to record these myths in such a permanent way as literally carving them in stone? Could these ideas possibly have been as important to those who believed in them as the practicalities of designating who was heir to what, or preserving the memories of great achievements by living individuals? Of course they were. These were the dealings of immortal gods. Of course their stories deserved to be carved from the most permanent material available, and thus immortalized. When you think about it, it makes sense to view written language as magical. It gives those who use it incredible capacities of memory, the ability to record events and spread information across long distances. Etymologically, a wizard who can cast a spell is the same as a wise person who can spell something out. And in the case of Nordic runes, it gave its users the ability to make their ideas known to historians and teenagers on the internet 1,000 years into the future, long after the deaths of the people who first thought and wrote those ideas. In contrast to this Nordic scramble for longevity, the early Buddhist disciples, members of a group known as the Sangha, believed that writing had a very different power. Transcribed events and ideas were trivialized by the act of being written down. This is why, for the first 100 years or so after the Buddha achieved nirvana, all Buddhist teachings were memorized as mantras. Although it is difficult to find information on this belief, there is a brief mention in a concise history of Buddhism by Andrew Skilton, which is in our church library. It makes sense, too, when you consider the emphasis on impermanence in the Buddhist worldview. Buddhism emphasizes the temporary nature of all things. Every object that will eventually become a new object or degrade into new soil. Every human body, which obviously will do the same, but also every human mind, which, even while alive, is not a static being, but instead a constantly shifting flow of consciousness from one thought, idea, and worldview to another. So too, runestones will weather slowly away at the side of roads, and moth-eaten, water-stained books will turn to dust. Of course, these people, whose goals are to be in touch with the transient nature of all things, wouldn't be clamoring for this false permanence of writing. Which raises an interesting question. When we write down something like a spiritual belief, what are we trying to accomplish? Do we really think our ideas can last forever? Or do we just want as many people, as far into the future as possible, to see it? I believe the answer lies in the practice of journaling. Being a massive nerd, I always saw journaling as a way to communicate my personal opinions on 21st century life to future archaeologists who might dig it up someday while wearing cool hats. But it was only relatively recently I discovered many people see journaling more as a mode of meditation. Psychology blogs and mental wellness articles agree it is a beneficial thing to do for one's mental health, and scores of folks seem to be recording their own lives on paper as a way to self-reflect, relax, or express ideas they feel they can tell no one else. These people aren't trying to immortalize themselves. At their most time-conscious, they're simply making a record of their own major life events to look back on for themselves as they grow old. As one user on the website Quora said, "This way, at least I will remember me." When I neatly left off the history of runic magic in the distant past, I wasn't really giving you the whole story. Rune casting as a religious practice has persisted to the modern day, performed by neo-pagans or other people who believe in divination and even astrologers. To find out more, I consulted two people who practice rune casting today, Matt and Joe. I learned that while some people consider to use rune casting as what Matt calls operant divination, others see it as a way to introspect and reframe their ideas and their thinking surrounding the question they've asked the runes. As Matt put it, either I'm asking Odin or the cosmos to show me the way, or, really, I'm just reconsidering what the runes make my ideas look like. I mean the following as no insult to either practice, but this reminds me of the goal of journaling, a way to reframe your experiences through the written word. Our next hymn is number 143 in the Gray Hymnal, not in vain the distance beacons. The hymn that we have just sung is someone's deeply held belief. It was an idea that the author believed was best expressed through song. From our perspective, the hymn is the experience, not the text itself. Each service is considered to have 3 or 4 hymns. This means sung hymns, not the combined 490 hymns in the teal and gray hymnals sitting on our shelves and beneath our seats. The hymns exist only as long as we are singing, before we carry on with the service as we are now, and they cease to be. Somebody named Jean-Michel Basquiat, whom admittedly I know nothing about besides this quote of his which has stuck with me, once said that art is how we decorate space, and music is how we decorate time. One of the most valuable ways to learn is through experience. Oscar Wilde, whom I know significantly more about, famously claimed that nothing worth knowing can be taught, implying that the most important things have to be learned through experience. But then why write at all, Mr. Wilde, if you don't believe that people will learn from what you're writing? I mean, I wouldn't wonder so much if his only works were his hilarious comedic plays. But in 1895, Oscar Wilde was sent to prison for loving another man, a type of love that any rational person in the modern day would celebrate, not condemn. From prison, he wrote a letter to his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas, that was the length of a short novel. Among other things, it touches on the failings of their relationship. Douglas never finished reading it, although he lived long enough to have read it 1,000 times over and maybe benefited from the information inside. So, should Oscar Wilde have taken his own advice and never tried to teach Lord Douglas his own failings? I don't think so. The letter, entitled De Profundis, means from the depths. It is more than just a call to break up. It is a dynamic snapshot into the perspective, beliefs, and viewpoints of the author at the most difficult period of his life. So, hymns may decorate time, but we would be remiss to overlook the spaces of our hymnals, decorated with instructions on how to recreate the experience of that hymn again and again. So too, a text like De Profundis allows the author or the reader to share the experiences of the author. In this case, a terrible experience made unique by the combined forces of the time that he lived in, the life he had lived before, and his incredible individual personality. If you don't happen to have your own experience of something, through some form of the written word, you can borrow someone else's. There are a lot more books about being Unitarian Universalist than I expected. With topics ranging from personal experiences as a UU to UU parenting to personal experiences as a UU to congregational multiculturalism to personal experiences again. I'm beginning to think that writing a book about being a UU is the second most UU-ish thing someone can do. Behind, of course, starting a committee. Having been presented with this smorgasbord of spirituality, I enlisted the help of Reverend Jonassen, who very kindly directed me to what is surely the most incredible Unitarian text ever penned. If any of you have a book that can compete, please let me know. It is entitled, There Is a Psychic World, and it details how the minister of this very church during the First World War, Horace Westwood, came to believe that some people have psychic abilities, despite initially not even believing in an afterlife. So, what could possibly have changed his mind? Was he converted by someone else who believed in these things? Well, no. He simply visited one of his own congregants who claimed to be a medium and experienced things that day that he didn't understand and experimented further. He remained skeptical throughout every makeshift psychic experiment he conducted, only reaching a conclusion about how he believed psychic phenomena must work after all other plausible explanations had been, in his opinion, ruled out. By the end of the book, his experiences lead him to believe that there are some people in the world with mediumistic powers, and that there may even be another plane of existence that these people can access. Having read his book, I personally don't agree. But what it has brought me to believe is that UUs stick to our fourth principle. I'm sure many other UUs have gone through a similar process, testing out their beliefs until they reach what they believe to be the truth. But what is fascinating about There Is a Psychic World is that Dr. Westwood put in the effort to document that experience so that those in the future investigating a possible belief in psychic phenomena could have that resource. Having looked at so many spiritual practices involving writing, we have to wonder, are Unitarian Universalist religious writings striving for immortality of our ideas? Or is it for personal spiritual introspection? But of course, the answer is more complicated than that. With an eye towards the transience of all things, we allow our worldviews to shift and grow. Like those who cast runes or write journals, we introspect upon our own beliefs. Then, like carving a rune stone, some of us record these views in books, sermons, or songs, so that, like the authors I loved in my elementary school library, we can each transfer the world that we live in, impacted by our beliefs, into the minds of others. It is a tradition that I feel honored to contribute to. Our closing hymn is 168 in our gray hymnals, One More Step.